Hey everyone, let's take a look at what we can after the big telecon on Tuesday about the Artemis schedule. So uh, there was a lot of information in the telecon. It was only an hour long. It was um, interesting and maybe not completely surprising that a lot was left unsaid. But the headline obviously is the move of Artemis II and Artemis III exactly the same amount of time. So they were a year apart in December, end 2024 and end 2025, and now they're exactly a year apart, give or take, in September of 2025 and September of 2026. And so now there's a much shorter gap between Artemis 3 and Artemis 4, 2 years, Artemis 4 being September of 2028. But now the gap between Artemis 1 and Artemis 2 has widened and is now could end up being somewhere around 3 years before Artemis 2 can launch after the Artemis 1 launch on November 16th of 2022. So um, these are the dates again. It was also mentioned there was a note about the Gateway co-manifest vehicle, which is the first two elements, the power and propulsion element, and the habitation and logistics outpost. The schedule that was noted in the telecon was September 2025, and the note was they're taking another look at the schedule, which means it's going to be delayed. The question is to when. Artemis 4. That's not a new date. That's the date that was rebaselined about a year ago. Eventually, they will probably revise that date, but not right now. So here's the sort of scorecard for the telecon. They were trying to cover the entire spectrum of media, from nerds that like details like me, all the way up to the television broadcast networks. And so everything from a 15-second soundbite to these long rambling podcasts that I do. And there's a lot of stuff in between. But they hit the headlines, which were Artemis 2, Artemis 3 are delayed, and then there were notes about some of the other things. So there was a note about the core stage for Artemis 2 and what they're going to do with that now that they've delayed the launch. There was a note about the European service module for Artemis 3. They're looking for that to be delivered now about 3 months later than we last heard. So instead of the end of 2023, probably about 3 months after that. So kind of the end of this current quarter, somewhere in the spring of this year. And then we also heard the lunar surface spacesuits with the XCVA program are on the backside of preliminary design review. And then for Starship HLS, Jessica Jensen was one of the dozen industry people that were standing by on the call. And so she provided a little bit of an update for the major ship-to-ship propellant transfer demo. They're still in the flight test for launch and reentry and landing. The third flight test is scheduled for next month, but then that big inflection point is going to be the test objectives for the ship-to-ship propellant transfer demo. That is, if I recall correctly, she said this year into next year. So end of 2024 into 2025, and then the uncrewed lunar landing demo would be in 2025. So, and then as I mentioned, the note that the Gateway CMB launch is likely to be sometime later than originally, or not originally, but the most recent schedule, which was end of 2025. That's probably somewhere in 2026 or later than that, but it's sometime after 2025 now that they would launch. And then the Gateway the vehicle, the spacecraft will take about a year to spiral out from its drop-off point in Earth orbit all the way out to its operating orbit, which is a near rectilinear halo orbit in cislunar space. So if it launched in the middle of 2026, then it would not be on station until the middle of 2027. So in the Telecon, we got the Artemis II delay. The Artemis III delay was exactly the same length of time. That obviously is a curiosity. So we got a little bit of an update on this and that. Obviously, the Starship test dates and milestones are big interest and are being reported. There's a lot of reporting on that, and so certainly people should take a look at reporting podcasts. There's a lot of information out there, and I'll it's relevant here, but I'm gonna focus on the other programs and what's going on around that as well. So the other major part of the Telecon was describing the issues with Orion that are driving this new schedule. We'd already heard about the heat shield performance investigation. They provided a little bit of color on that, but that's still ongoing. But then they talked about this circuit that needs to be redesigned for a common motor drive in the life support system, the environmental control and life support system for Orion. It's a motor that drives valves in some of the components. So there was that problem, and then they also have this problem that it sounds like it's less that they're farther into the investigation about the circuit redesign than they are about this battery performance issue. That they did this shock test of a battery under essentially worst case launch abort scenario where a hypothetical where the SLS is not just failing but is basically out of control in the most extreme way. So what they said about these was that the circuit for the ECLS valves, that redesign was the major driver in the new schedule for September 2025. It didn't sound like the heat shield the heat shield investigation is still going along on kind of the same schedule that we'd heard in November, in a presentation in November. So it's not clear there's any change in the relationship between that investigation and the new schedule. But it sounds like they need to do a lot more testing and get a lot more information about the batteries before they look at how it's going to affect the schedule, if at all. So that's obviously one of the new questions coming out of the Telecon. So in terms of what was covered in the Telecon, basically the new target dates. Immediately, it seemed like within minutes of the end of the Telecon, we got an email from Boeing that gave us a nice update on the status of SLS production. So, core stage 2, we were wondering what was happening with integrated testing. The update was that they're still doing testing that is not completed. In the Telecon, it was noted that they're going to hold that core stage, that full core stage at Michoud Assembly Facility in New Orleans. They didn't say indefinitely, but they didn't provide a time frame, so there's another question. The integrated testing, they did not mention the pneumatic or hydraulic thrust vector control testing had been completed, so they may still be ahead of that. I did ask to see if we might, if they do take video of the TVC tests of the engines gimbaling. I did ask if that's possible to be published. We'll see. It's not clear if that test has been completed yet or not, or conducted yet. And then if so, would we get anything? But after those other little notes, the rest of it is basically to be discussed, to be determined. It's not clear, it's not clear about milestones. It's not clear. Well, I'll go into that. It was not specifically stated, but now that there's only 2 years between Artemis III and Artemis IV, and the possibility that Artemis III might be might be more than a year after Artemis II. It's any talk of extending SLS Block 1 any more than 3 launches is, if it's if it wasn't dead before, it probably is now. It probably was dead before, though, but it seems increasingly less likely that that stuff, that the tooling for the ICPS, it seems more likely that that's going to either be mothballed or accessed, and that SLS really wants the Block 1B and the exploration upper stage capabilities, and so as the schedule compacts towards the end of the decade, it makes it less and less likely that there will be anything. There will be any additional Block 1 flights, if it wasn't already already over. So new questions, there's a lot of them. We didn't really get we didn't get a lot of background on how these issues, not how. They did talk about that a little bit, but they didn't really talk about, especially with the battery issue, how that happened, when the testing occurred. There was a little bit more detail on the circuit that needs to be redesigned, but then there wasn't a lot of color about how big of a challenge it's going to be for Lockheed Martin to get to those components within the Orion, the Artemis II Orion. They're going to need to replace something or fix something, and it wasn't clear whether we're talking about just going in and taking a whole box out, unplugging all the connectors, taking it out, bringing a new box in, or whether you'd go into a box and pull the card that this circuit is on, or maybe it's even more intricate than that. So we didn't really get any color on that. We didn't get a lot of color on where the circuit redesign is. Is it complete? Has it gone through reviews? and that, and then obviously the battery issue, there wasn't much beyond the test case where they saw this this behavior that was not to spec, even though it was an extreme abort case as it was described. And then with as I mentioned before, it was a question that was asked in a different way in the Telecon, which is it, how realistic is Artemis III in September of 2026, irrespective of when Artemis II flies. But I mean, again, seeing Artemis III delayed in lockstep with Artemis II, the Moon to Mars programs, which were, that office is new, but the programs have been around for a while, especially the Orion and SLS and ground systems programs, and they've had a goal for a long time to get to a 12-month and annual flight cadence. And I think that's still an objective that they're trying to, it's a goal that they want to accomplish, even if they can't sustain it right away. We can see here, more than a year after Artemis I, they're still working through post-flight analysis and issues, although these issues are not these new issues are not post-flight. But I think it would be desirable. It's a goal, and so that's part of it. But then again, it's the question of how realistic is the Artemis III schedule, and so that's going to be something. All the watch items and all the questions that were there before the Telecon are still there. So yes, lingering questions. Are there lingering questions? Yes, there are lingering questions pretty much about everything. So, again, the Artemis I post-flight analysis, and so we didn't get we have asked for an update about the in-flight anomalies. Are there any of those open still? Not sure when we're going to get a response on that. All the Artemis II milestones and those schedules, the milestones are still the same, but the schedules are now new, and we don't know we don't have any updates on those. It's the HLS milestones and schedules are going to be, it's a unique development style for spacecraft and launch vehicle development, to do it in an iterative way like this. And so it's certainly going to be a curiosity and interesting to see how many Starship flight tests there are this year. How do they get to the ship-to-ship propellant transfer demo this year? That would obviously be huge progress, but do they get there this year? With Gateway, we still have the schedule questions. When is that updated launch date going to be provided? And then with the XCVA lunar spacesuits, when's critical design review? They did mention that the supply base for the spacesuits was a factor in the Artemis III rescheduling. But I imagine that there were other factors and they did not mention the other ones. So the Orion and SLS production schedules for Artemis III are also lingering questions that have just been refreshed by this. So where do things stand now? So Artemis II is the mission right in front of NASA. What's the new timetable for all of the Artemis II milestones? I'll come back to that. Is 10 months enough extra time for Artemis II, since you're dealing with HLS development, Orion production, SLS production, and the spacesuits. And out of those, interestingly, Orion's probably got the most mature production out of the four. SLS is introducing a new production site for Artemis III to finish the core stage, which is obviously the major schedule driver for the SLS part of Artemis III. So maybe it's possible that the 10 months might be enough to envelop the Orion and SLS production timetable. But we don't know what those, we don't know what those timetables are. We don't know what the HLS and XEVA timetables are, because the latter are private development. We'll get what we get. So obviously the next Starship flight test next month will be something to watch. Then programmatically, NASA is doing NASA has their life cycle, formal life cycle milestones. And so the HLS Option A and the Gateway CMV entering the final design and procurement, or not procurement, but the final design and production and building the vehicle stage. When is that? Where are those? Where are the programs relative to Phase C? And then similarly for the lunar spacesuits, the critical design review. The critical design review would be in Phase C in terms of the typical life cycle. And then it's still 5 years down the road, but looking at Mobile Launcher 2 status of, it's under construction now. What are the interim milestones for that? SLS Block 1B. We at least have we got an update when I was at Michoud for the NSF site visit that we just did. I got an update. Hopefully we're going to be publishing something pretty soon. But it's relatively near term. So it's still, when's the EUS green run going to be? In fact, before that, when's the EUS structural test article going to be completed? When's the flight article going to be completed to go to green run, etc. So, so this is the watch items slide from a couple times back. Now we have a couple of additional things to add here, but all of these milestones, the vacuum test, the mobile launcher rolling back to the VAB for stacking, core stage completion and delivery, and then the last item is essentially put more succinctly, when do they start stacking of the boosters? So, and then same thing. This is the same slide from a couple of times back. What are the new schedules for the Artemis III Orion and SLS? Especially, so the Artemis III Orion production, Artemis III SLS core stage, when do they expect to complete those now? The cost and schedule baselines for Starship HLS, for the Artemis III version of Starship HLS. What NASA has to provide a baseline commitment to Congress for that eventually. Similarly for the Gateway, for the launch of the two initial elements. We know that they're working on a schedule, but when are we going to get it? And then the lunar spacesuits that Axiom's making. We know that they are on the backside of the preliminary design review. Is August still achievable for the critical design review? So hopefully in the next several weeks, I'll get more information from NASA. We have a lot of questions. We've asked for updates for some of these watch items, but there's a little more focus on the new issues with Orion. these two issues with the electrical circuit that needs to be redesigned, and then the battery. What happened with the battery in that PyroShock test? So hopefully we'll get some new. Hopefully we'll get some updates on all of that in the next several weeks. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching, and hopefully in the meantime we will get some updates on core stage 3 welding, which will open up EUS welding, weld confidence, and so on. So hopefully we'll get some picture dumps in the next handful of weeks too. In the meantime, there's an RS-25 engine test. I think it's scheduled for Wednesday, January 17th. That'll be something to keep, to be watching out for. And there's always going to be things going on. And so I will come back when I have more information. And hopefully that's the idea, is to just try and provide more frequent updates on Artemis. There's a lot of, I'm watching the Starship content out there just like everybody else is, but I also want to try, and it's my news beat is, EGS, Orion, SLS, and so on, what I would call Artemis, in air quotes. And so I'm hoping, as I find out more this year, to report that on a more frequent basis. And so stay tuned, and thanks for watching, as I said before. Thanks.